All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Rondelli Foundation webinar, Turkey in Global Affairs. This is a third one in a row of webinars dedicated to our neighbors. The first one was with the Armenian participants. They presented their views on the peace process. Then I had a distinct pleasure of hosting a webinar with Azerbaijani expert with their perspective on where we stand with the peace process. And today it's my great pleasure and honor of welcoming two Turkish participants, distinguished academics and practitioners, who I will ask to talk about Turkish view on the regional developments and on the global affairs. We seem to be living in a world filled with turmoil, and wherever you look, including from Turkey, you will see many issues with stability, conflicts, etc. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Professors Meliha Altunışık and Professor Mithat Çelikpala. Like I said, we are really honored to have them. Professor Altunışık is a professor in the Department of International Relations at my favorite Ankara University, Middle East Technical University, METU. She's also a non-resident fellow in the Middle East Institute at Washington, D.C., and she was also a Fulbright scholar at Center for Middle East Studies, Harvard, etc. She has distinguished biography, which we will supply when we publish this webinar, this video on our website. Professor Çelikpala is a professor of international relations and vice rector at Kadir Has University in Istanbul. He teaches graduate and undergraduate courses on Eurasian security, energy, critical infrastructure, security protection, Turkish foreign and domestic policy. And he is also, like I said, a practitioner. And I'm very proud that with both professors, our paths have crossed in the past. And I hope that will continue in the future. Dr. Çelikpala's biography will also be attached to the video that we will publish. But I would like to start with Professor Altunışık and with her view on how the global affairs look from the Ankara perspective. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Yes, a year ago, I was in beautiful Tbilisi, participating in Rondelli Foundation, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope to have such occasions in the future. Really, we are, I mean, wherever perspective you look at, we are going through a tremendous change and transformation. Obviously, this affects Turkey as well. There's a lot of uncertainty, fluidity in international relations at the global level, and this has been going for some time. As you know, one of the discussions that we, scholars of international relations and also practitioners have been doing in the last few years is how this global politics is changing. There are different arguments as to what it is transitioning to, but one thing is clear is that there's a lot of uncertainty and fluidity in international politics. And this affects countries like Turkey, middle powers like Turkey, and also regions around Turkey. And Turkey is, I call it cusp state. Turkey is part of different regions Turkey is active in different regions around itself, including South Caucasus and Central Asia, Middle East, the Balkans, the Black Sea region, Eastern Mediterranean, and therefore it is very much affected by the transformations that are going on there as well. As someone who focuses mostly on the Middle East, I would like to talk a little bit about the challenges that emanate from the Middle East from Turkey's perspective in recent years. This region is also extremely fluid. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there are many conflicts and tensions in the region. And inevitably, these have repercussions for Turkey's security and Turkey's politics. In fact, just before Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, Turkey was normalizing its relations with many of the regional powers that it had problematic relationship before, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, and Israel. Engaging with them in a more transactional manner and basically trying to improve its relations with them. But Hamas's attacks and the developments since then, had a tremendous impact on that trajectory. First of all, Turkey's position on especially Israel's response to Hamas has been highly critical, and which in fact soon led to the end of normalization with Israel. On the contrary, you started to see increasing tensions between the two countries at the discursive level and later even in practice. So this has become one of the challenges for Turkey. Turkey, as I said, became very critical of Israel. Initially did not end its economic relations, but when especially the AKP's base started to criticize continuing economic relations, they also suspended them, although there are accusations that somehow some level of economic relations are continuing, but it's hard to detect. And overall, as a policy, Turkey has ended its economic ties with Israel. Later, this issue, and this also meant that Turkey, in a way, has been cut off from any kind of role to play in the Gaza conflict, and could not mediate and could not, only in some instances there were some attempts to do so. Turkey provided humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, but Turkey's influence over the course of events that were triggered by Hamas's attack remained minimal, I have to say. That started to change with the change of regime in Syria. And that became really a turning point in terms of recent Turkish foreign policy in the Middle East, because, I mean, Turkey has been an interesting actor in that regard, because since the start of the uprising against Assad regime, Turkey initially tried to convince Assad to make some reforms, but when it became quickly clear that Assad regime would not do that, Turkey took a position against the regime. And I have to say that Turkey has been the most consistent actor since 2011 that argued for the overthrow of this regime. Although in recent years, Erdogan, within the context of this regional normalization, was also talking about normalization with Syria as well, but that never materialized. And over the years, Turkey has been supporting the opposition different opposition groups, giving logistical support to them, giving training them militarily, and basically, supporting the overthrow of the regime. In the meantime, another important challenge that emerged from Syria to Turkey was the emergence of this Syrian Kurdish group, PYD, and its armed wing, YPG, in northern part of Syria, especially northeastern Syria, and cooperating with the United States in its fight against ISIS. So that, over the years, became yet another important threat from Turkey's perspective, because not only because Turkey's general concern about possibility of division of Syria, establishment of a Kurdish state, but also because of the organic links that this PYD had with the PKK. So, unlike, for instance, Turkey's concerns about Kurdish parties in northern Iraq in the 1990s, this time this was seen even as a bigger threat because of these links with the PKK. And finally, this looked like a more important threat from Turkey's perspective because of the relations with the United States and the US support, including military, to this group. So, in the last few years, this has been mainly Turkey's threat perception, and in response to that, Turkey conducted several operations, military operations, as a result of which began to control different parts of northern Syria, and prevented PYD-YPG to create a contiguous region in northern Syria that it would control. So this was basically, these were the concerns of Turkey in Syria in the last 10 years. And as you know, recently, as a result of Israel's war against Hezbollah, as a result of Israeli-Iranian confrontation, what we saw was basically breaking down and weakening of the axis of resistance, which Syria was also a part, which weakened Hezbollah and Iran's support to Bashar regime, which eventually led to the overthrow of the regime by opposition forces led by HTŞ, basically. And so that created a new strategic context for Turkey in Syria, which, of course, Turkey was happy about this change, and clearly as an actor who is on the ground and who has been supportive of the opposition, different opposition forces, and who has had different relationships with these forces, suddenly found itself in a more advantageous position in terms of affecting the transformation, post-Assad transformation in Syria. So this put Turkey in the geopolitical map of the Middle East once again, as the most influential actor, not necessarily the only actor, but most influential actor in Syria. This created new opportunities for Turkey because, to create basically, to help to create a Syria that is more friendly to Turkey, to deal with, the Kurdish threat that I explained emanating from Syria. So, it's create and possibility of returning at least some of the Syrian refugees that have been residing in Turkey. So, a lot of opportunities, but also there are significant challenges still because Syria is still in transition. It's not clear where it will evolve. There were some developments as to There were basically, I would say, two major issues here. The overall issue is for Turkey to support territorial integrity of Syria, to make sure that Syria remains intact, and there would be a stronger central government that can assure that. But beyond that, there are, two main issues and several other issues. One main issue has been the Kurdish issue and what will happen to the YPG and PYD. And now, as you know, in the fall, there was this agreement between the PYD and the central government, which calls for the integration of the YPG forces into Syrian army. And also, by the end of this year, the agreement stipulates that the central government will be controlling the borders, airports, and oil fields in the areas that currently controlled by the PYD, the Kurdish group in Syria. So this is, of course, important from Turkey's perspective as well. This is a positive development. But of course, Turkey wants to see how this is going to be implemented, right? I mean, this has been agreed, but it has to be seen how it's going to be implemented. Related with that, there is the issue of US presence. I mean, US presence, of course, as I said, US presence was allowing PYD to govern these areas. So with the coming of Trump administration, the question has been, whether or when US would withdraw from Syria. Recently, there's this announcement that only a fraction of the US forces, I think 600, would be withdrawing from Syria. It's not clear what will happen to the rest. And so one issue for Turkey is, as I said, to follow the implementation of the agreement with PYD and the central government in Syria, together with the negotiations with the new Trump administration, which has not happened yet. I mean, we had this news that Erdogan was going to visit Washington in mid-April, and then we heard that it was postponed. So there is some ambiguity about that. So that issue is there. The second issue is about Israeli actions in Syria and possibilities of confrontation between Syria and Turkey. Since the overthrow of the Bashar regime, Israel is attacking, already controlling, some parts of southern Syria, and also attacking military installations. And recently, for instance, there has been some talk that Turkey will have a military base in Syria. And some of the recent Israeli attacks, it has been claimed that we're targeting that as well. We don't know much about this, but clearly with increasing Israeli engagement with Syria and Israeli attacks in Syria to make sure that Syria would remain weak and maybe even divided, you have this possibility of confrontation between Turkey, which is the dominant power in Syria now, and Israel. And recently we heard that both sides have been negotiating in Azerbaijan to make sure that there will not be an escalation without control, because these situations are generally very very dangerous. So that's another development that is important. And in the meantime, all that is very much linked, and I will end with that. I hope I'm not exceeding my time. All that is linked with domestic politics in Turkey. In what way? In the way about the Kurdish issue. Because in the fall, the MHP leader, the ultra-nationalist party, MHP's leader, which is considered as part of, although they're not in the government, but they are considered since 2007 military coup attempt. there has been an alliance between AKP and MHP, and AKP can continue to rule in a way because of MHP support. They call themselves National Alliance. And the leader of the MHP came out and said, this PKK should lay arms and there should be an end to the PKK. And, Öcalan, even he initially said Öcalan should come to the parliament and gave a speech, which shocked everybody. And so basically, with that, they started this process, kind of a peace process, which will entail, PKK to lay arms and to end its arms struggle against Turkey. And they call it Turkey Without Terror process, that's the name they gave it. And so they started this process. And in that process, what has happened so far, the DEM party, the Kurdish party in the parliament, has been basically mediating, going back and forth. They are seeing Öcalan in jail, and then talking to the government and the MHP officials. And furthermore, they have visited northern Iraq, and they talked to two major parties in northern Iraq, two Kurdish parties, Kurdistan Democratic Party of Barzani and the PUK of Talabani family. And so they are also negotiating with them and, mediating with them as well. So it's an interesting process. There is all this discussion in Turkey about to what extent Erdogan is supporting this or not supporting this, because it's interesting, more than Erdogan, it was Bahçeli, the head of the Nationalist Party, who has been vocal about it. I mean, he seems to be pushing this process, and he sees this as a national project, right? Why I am talking about this, all this is very much linked to what's happening in Syria, and maybe what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in the Middle East in general. And the argument they put forward is that the Kurdish issue has been the Achilles heel for Turkey. Whoever wanted to disturb Turkey, they used it, and including Israel in the past. So the concern is that, in this uncertain, fluid, very unstable Middle East and globally the world, we need to, as Turkey, we need to be strong. We need to take our place in this evolving world order and regional order. And for that, we need to end this Kurdish conflict that is weakening us, giving our enemies, that's the argument, enemies opportunities to, weaken us. So basically, that's what they've been saying. Sorry, I thought I turned it off. So I mean, what is interesting is that, and I will end up with that. Like global changes, regional changes, and domestic changes in Turkey all are coming together. It's really an interesting moment. Of course, there is a lot of uncertainty. We don't know how this will evolve and whether this will work the way Bahçeli lays it down. But all these things seem to be related. The intensification of global competition, and even the diversification, the wedge between US and the EU, all kinds of developments around Turkey, major shifts in the Middle East. If there are questions, we can talk about this, but Middle East is transforming, dramatically, and Turkey, trying to sort of locate itself within this context, mainly focusing on Syria and linking this with the Kurdish issue domestically in Turkey and trying to end it. We'll see whether it will be successful or not. And I will end here and will be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Professor Altaneshik, for Excellent analysis and exactly bang on time, 20 minutes. Exactly. I would like to give the floor to Professor Çelikpala. Again, I suggest that you speak for 20 minutes, if it's okay, and then we'll have the question and answer session. Dr. Çelikpala, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador Badrize. It's a privilege and joy together with you, and of course, Professor Altınışık, in such a kind of a webinar together. It's my pleasure, and it's also an honor to take part in the Rondelli Foundation's one of those activities. Georgia in specific, but the Caucasus is dear to my heart. Therefore, I always love to be part of such a kind of a discussion, especially in those days. As the title is Türkiye in Global Affairs, let me start with some introductory remarks and then try to touch upon some regions. There is no need to touch upon the Middle East because Melia Hoca covered in a comprehensive way. But during this question and answer session, I may add some perspectives. And how can we see Türkiye or Turkey? Türkiye is the also a sign of the current environment in the new Türkiye. We use Türkiye, or the state renamed itself as Türkiye, but it's not easy for all of us to say Türkiye most of the time because in English we just use Turkey, and therefore time to time I just use both of those labels for my country. For many, from the foreign policy perspective, Turkey is considered as an actor striving for a strategic autonomy in the global transition, or an actor in search of a new international order. And it is a kind of a discussion that takes all those criticisms or analysis on Turkey last maybe 2 decades or a decade at least. From this perspective, Turkey is trying to become an autonomous free rider in different regions. And we were chatting before starting the webinar. The regions mean Turkey for not only one region or many regions. And those regions are the regions of all those global issues, from the Black Sea to the Caucasus, from the Middle East to the Balkans, or the Mediterranean or Aegean, the Caspian or Central Asian countries or Turkic republics. Therefore, we see Turkey in all those regions, and all those regions are concern for Turkey. And is it possible for such a kind of a regional actor to deal with all those regions or all those issues in those regions, whether to produce some answers to the questions or respond the expectation of all those regional actors or the partner countries? This is a big question mark, but it is the case. We are trying to understand Turkish attitude, and we see a kind of an actor trying to become an autonomous free rider. And this is a big discussion, and this is partly correct consideration, or it's not wrong to say that it is not a concern for Turkey. And when you go through the documents issued by the Foreign Ministry, Turkish Foreign Ministry, for example, or the statements by the officials, including the President Erdogan himself, we see an actor struggling or striving to be decisive in all those regional affairs surrounding Turkey, if not the global ones. And, this is a new concept or new phenomenon for Turkey. It is understandable somehow. Why? Because, Turkey, with almost 1.2 trillion US dollar GDP, is one of the members of G20. Economically smaller than India, Brazil, or Mexico, it is nearly the same size as Saudi Arabia, and much bigger than Argentina, Nigeria, or South Africa. That makes Turkey a kind of an actor eager to move forward, and other regional actors also expecting something from Turkey. And time to time, I go through the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs webpage and try to see is there any kind of a change in terms of attitude or narrative. And there is a synopsis very lately published there. It calls or labeled as National Foreign Policy in the Century of Turkey. You see, this is a narrative. Century of Turkey. This is the perspective from Turkish Foreign Ministry or the Presidential Office. And in this synopsis, they say that we are going through a period characterized by increased uncertainties, unpredictabilities, crises, conflicts, and threatening. Those all of them are threatening peace and stability in our vicinity, accelerated political and economic rivalries among various powers, and erosion of multilateralism and universal values. You see, this is a narrative. Now we have an actor, a regional actor, trying to be part of an autonomous actor dealing with all those issues and to project its power towards not only for the regional actors, but try to balance it with the other global actors as well. And a kind of an autonomous actor. And then comes the question, autonomy from whom? Or autonomy from what? Is this from the West? Because, for many, the Turkish Republic is a Western actor, at least trying to be part of a Western world, European Union, better relations with the US, a NATO member country almost from the beginning, and a kind of an EU accession country, despite the fact that we have some issues. Therefore, trying to be autonomous from what? Other great powers of the region, like Russia or Iran, the rivals? What about the EU and the others? Therefore, this is a kind of a big discussion. And very lately, we see many of those voices, and we are hearing those voices from the global south. A new narrative is emerging. And this in global south, some countries are calling for reforms to make the system more just and representative, an international one. And we see Turkey is one of those countries as well again. And President Erdogan has quipped that the world is bigger than five. This is very common in Turkey. A reference to the exclusionary nature of the membership in the UN Security Council. And Ankara trying to be part of this system and maybe the sixth of those equation. Is it possible or not? I don't know. And as a global south, another perspective, we see Ankara that values alternatives to the Western or the US dominated international organizations. This is also a new concept for Ankara and has expressed an interest in joining alternative organizations very lately, such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization or BRICS. Ankara sees these groups as vehicles to amplify Turkish influence on the world stage and build alternatives to the current international system as well. This is also a new concept for understanding Turkey's attitude in those global affairs. In line with this approach, we see some schemes, mottos, or statements from the decision makers like compassionate power, century of Turkey, 360 degrees of foreign policy making, balancing act, multilateral cooperation, regional ownership, or regional responsibility, name it. There are many last decade. I don't know, this kind of an inflation is good for Turkish foreign policy or to understand the Turkish attitude or not. It's a big question mark, but it blurs the minds, especially in our neighboring regions. Maybe someone easily can say that this is a middle power attitude. Like many other regional actors or middle powers, Turkey seeks a middle course with the flexible foreign policy labeled to conduct an independent and national foreign policy. And this is a new concept for our regions. And the idea is to develop and pursue an approach that prioritizes flexibility and strategic independence, intending to regenerate Turkey's historical, in quote, role as a regional power, if not a global one. But the question mark is that what about the regional actors and other global actors? How do they react? Such a kind of a expectation or policy planning. It is very complicated and it's not easy. And we see very aggressive Turkish foreign ministry, with more than 250 diplomatic and consular missions. Turkey has the third largest diplomatic network in the world after China and the US. And Ankara, I just checked it before the webinar, hosts more than 140 embassies. This is a huge number. It shows a kind of a perspective, whether it's an overstretching self-confidence, whether it is up to Turkey's capacity and capability. Is it possible to respond to the expectations of all those countries? Those are the issues that we have to think. And before touching upon, I would like to touch upon the Black Sea and the Caucasus related issues last couple of minutes. But beforehand, how can I summarize? I can say that developments in and around Turkey, like Middle East or the Balkans or in the Black Sea area or the Caucasus, create some opportunities for Ankara very lately. But these opportunities also contain many stakes. Ankara needs to manage all those complexities all together. And this is the limitations of Turkey's activeness. What about, for example, Melia Hoca mentioned domestic issues. Highly polarized political and social domestic environment. It limits. We have many regime issues, crony capitalism, economic dire straits affects Turkey's actions and those top level issues that makes everything much more complicated. The second one is, of course, international issues, the transactional character of foreign policy making, especially Turkey's relations with the US and EU, because in all those regions, Turkey means as an actor or the regional power just because of its Western connections. If Turkey lost its Western connections and reputation, does it mean something for all those regional actors, such as Georgia or Armenia or Azerbaijan or even Ukraine or this Middle Eastern countries? It's a big question mark. The other one is, of course, diplomatic activism necessitates predictability and sustainable relations. This is also a big question mark. Turkey is not a predictable country very lately. We have, I don't know, it's not a sustainable environment for Turkey. And therefore, what about trust building and trust with allies and partners? What about their expectations from Ankara? The last one is, of course, weak financial structure. In terms of FDIs and Western dependency, this is also a limit to Turkey's activeness. In terms of regions, let me say Balkans is another story. Let me put it aside. And Melia Hoca covered the Middle East. Therefore, the Black Sea area from the western shores, which means Bulgaria to Romania, the EU and NATO member countries, up to from Ukraine to the Caucasus, including Georgia and all over the Caucasus, we have issues. And since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ankara, it's very well known, sought a policy based on the regional geopolitical balance and tried to change it in favor. And there are a couple of mottos. One is, very well, regional ownership. And the other one is regional cooperation, not only for the Caucasus, but for all the regions. But you can easily observe those perspectives in the Black Sea area and the Caucasus. And still emphasizing its policy, economic and commercial and political and security-wise, based on this regional ownership and regional cooperation. But what kind of a region is that? We are competing with Russia, and the other actors. But on the other hand, we have a kind of a transactional relations. And this transactionalism creates a kind of a limitation. And, there are priorities. Crimea or Ukraine is a priority for Ankara. On the other hand, Georgia is a priority for Ankara. And of course, Azerbaijan is the most important actor for Ankara. And then under those priorities, how to deal with the others? In this context, for example, Armenia has been sidelined. The other actors are in a secondary position, but Turkey is trying to cover all those areas and trying to create its own regions as a Western actor, despite the fact that we have some issues with our Western partners. It's a great challenge. Try to find some middle way between Russia and Ukraine in the Black Sea area to defend its own interest in the Black Sea itself and Montreux Convention and other stories. But how to establish a permanent regional peace? It is a big important question mark. If you are prioritizing regionalization and regional ownership, you need to establish a kind of a you need to establish a kind of a, how can I say, permanent regional peace. Does it Ankara's capacity and capability or not? Has Ankara a kind of a policy perspective to create such a kind of a position. We see that Ankara adopts a kind of a decisive stance in the post-war political environment in the Caucasus and some complicated position in the Black Sea area. In the alignment with Bakus, for example, in the Caucasus, is it possible to establish lasting peace through comprehensive negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia? It's a big question mark, for example. A regional actor, but it's not a neutral one. We have issues. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the 44-day war, I mean, a kind of a dual diplomatic breakthrough involving Türkiye-Armenia rapprochement and a formal peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia. This was the perspective. But initially, the hope was that these two processes would unfold simultaneously, fostering regional stability and cooperation in the region. I mean, Türkiye-Armenia rapprochement, hand in hand with the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace treaty. However, Turkey's diplomatic strategy underwent a significant shift, and Ankara prioritized an Azerbaijan-Armenia peace first, and followed by a Turkish-Armenian rapprochement. And this is a new approach. And then we see that Azerbaijan and Armenia are ready to, or at least create a kind of a text. They negotiated it, but we are waiting for a new phase. And still, the issues are the same from the Turkish perspective within the Caucasus. And we know Georgia is dealing with its own issues, domestic issues, and the Georgian priority is still on the paper for Ankara. And how to regionalize and how to normalize relations within the region with the facilitation of Ankara? Big question mark. The second thing is, or priority, is further improving political relations with the entire regional countries within the framework of regional ownership. For many, Russia is, I don't know, untrustful partner. It's not a partner, it's a threat. But for Turkey, this is a kind of a partner. How to bring all the actors, for example, in the Black Sea, Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Moldova, Turkey, and Georgia, together with Russia. Is it possible? Big question mark. Or what about the issues in the Caucasus? We are just witnessing a kind of a shrinking Russian presence in the Caucasus, but whether Turkey has a capacity and capability to cover or recover Russian presence, and this is a big question mark. The third priority is developing connectivity projects to deepen economic and trade relations throughout the entire, Black Sea and the Caucasus regions. We have many projects, increasing connectivity and economic trade relations. But, under the current circumstances, without resolving all those issues, those connectivity projects are still on the map only. How to move forward? We already established Georgia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and other links. Is it possible to expand such a kind of a connectivity projects from the Central Asia up to the Europe? Is it a big question mark? But this is a possibility. And we need to understand activeness of Turkey from this perspective as well. And the other one is how to energize security-oriented regional initiatives institutions to develop a kind of a mutual confidence building measures for sustained regional security and stability. Is it possible for Ankara to play a role with all those Caucasian and Black Sea countries all together to create a new perspective? If you cannot create such a kind of a trust building environment and to play a role of a regional actor, it's almost impossible to lead the regional balances. Let me finish some couple of conclusions. How can I say? To successfully achieve these strategic goals of Turkey in the global affairs and regional affairs, it is very crucial to formulate a comprehensive and well-balanced approach that is practical and adaptable. Regional actors need to be practical, and they have to develop some policy perspectives adaptable in all those regions. And this involves positioning Turkey as a proactive, from my perspective, a Western actor, while engaging with Russia and other regional actors as well. And this carefully calibrated strategy reflects a nuanced understanding of regional dynamics. And still, it has sometimes drawn, how can I say, intense criticisms from Turkey's Western allies who may perceive it or Ankara as overly accommodating to non-Western powers. And this is also a limitation. Turkey need to work together with our Western allies in different issues and in different regions. Then it means something for the other regional actors to replace other rival authoritarian regimes. And this necessitates the democratized Turkish domestic environment and to create a kind of a rule of law and trust building between Turkey and the other regional actors. Dear Ambassador, let me stop here. I think I'm on time as well. And depending on your questions and comments, try to respond those other issues.
Thank you, Professor Çelikpala. Also, you've been exceptionally punctual, so thank you both for that. Now we are opening our question and answer session, and I have quite a few questions, and I would invite you both to pick your questions from which I will start asking in the same order as we spoke. First, I would like to agree from personal experience that Ankara has a very special and most vibrant diplomatic community, international diplomatic body present there. I've been serving in Ankara. It was a distinct pleasure. And nowhere in the world I have made that many friends as in Ankara. I have some since 1999. So it's completely true what you said. And I would also like to mention that regardless whether we call Turkey a middle power or regional power, it is at least a multi-regional power. Whichever direction Turkey looks, it looks at different regions with different challenges and opportunities. And you also have told us the history of Turkish strategies. Some of them actually were basically put in slogans. Sometimes they didn't always work. For instance, zero problems with neighbors didn't 100% work out, but at least this was the spirit in which Turkish diplomacy has been working for many years. And in that spirit, I would like to start asking some of those questions. The world has changed dramatically, not only since my time in Ankara in the late 90s, early 2000s, but from very recently. And this includes the new challenges for Turkey when it approaches the regional issues, whether it's the Middle East, whether it is the Black Sea, whether it is the Caucasus. In each of these directions, there are new realities, and the traditional partners of Turkey, with which it worked for years, they have changed their approach. And the most notably, it is the United States and Russia. The Russia's approach has not really changed. It simply shifted the gears, and it is now doing what it's been trying to do much more aggressively and openly. But we have a very distinct change in the Washington policy. And I wanted to ask you both what you think are the prospects of Turkish-American cooperation, which is a bit curious because on the one hand, President Trump clearly likes, on the personal level, President Erdogan. But on the other hand, many things that the United States does these days, especially with regard to the Middle Eastern policies, I mean, are in direct conflict with the Turkish attitudes and interests. On the other hand, you have Russia. Again, you mentioned that Turkey cooperates with Russia. There, I wanted to ask you whether Turkey sees an additional role in the attempts to contribute to the peace process between Russia and Ukraine. We don't see much progress as a result of the American involvement. On the contrary, to be perfectly honest, and not that anyone has taken this seriously when President Trump promised to end it in one day. But we are approaching his 100th day in office, and we're no nearer, I think, the peace. So again, I wanted to hear from you whether you think Turkey has been playing a role in mediating certain technical agreements, but whether it sees a role for a more comprehensive peace deal. And obviously, speaking from the South Caucasus, we wanted to hear from you what you think about the stalled peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I spoke at 2 conferences recently, and I tried to make this point again from personal experience that I had questions to Armenian partners many years ago, questioning the wisdom of not settling with Azerbaijan when they were in the position of strength, and when all it took from Armenia were the return of some of the territories to Azerbaijan, and they would have secured much more favorable peace deal. And now I have this question to our Azerbaijani friends, whether they are repeating the mistake, and whether they are now basically wasting this historic window of opportunity, because what has changed in many years, since many years, is that Russia has more or less lost most of its leverages of Azerbaijan, with the Second Karabakh War especially, and whether this delay risks the ending of the window of opportunity and the return of Russia, and return with vengeance. Speaking of Turkish-Russian cooperation, by the way, Turkey has been one of the most reliable partners of Georgia. I have worked as a diplomat with Turkey for many years, and was both very important and also a pleasant partner. We have worked through many different issues. So it's been one of the greatest partners for Georgia. However, when we look at Russian-Turkish cooperation, and especially this 3+3 format to which Georgia has been repeatedly invited, we view this in a completely different kind of connotation. You would not be surprised. So sorry for taking this long, and I will also relate to you the questions from our audience, which we also have. So if you could first respond to my initial questions, you pick at your will. I would ask Professor Altunashik first, and then Professor Çelikpala, and then we'll go to the second round of the questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I will thank you for the questions. I will pick your first question about the US. I've been working on this recently, and particularly in the context of the Middle East. Well, when I look at Turkey-US relations, actually, especially in the new century, they have been evolving and increasingly becoming, full of tensions. I mean, this started in 2003 with the US invasion of Iraq. Although there, US differentiated between the AKP, which it had good relationship, newly formed AKP, and the traditional establishment, especially the military. But soon the relations became much complex. In 2010s, the US started to be critical of Turkey's relations with Sudan, with Iran, with Hamas, and Turkey started to criticize Turkey for having increasingly problematic relations with Israel, Mavi Marmara, and all that. So this continued till today. I mean, there is a trend there. When I look at it, there's a trend since the beginning of the century of increasingly problematic relations between the two sides. This does not mean that there are no areas of cooperation. There has always been, and they cooperate in different areas, but the nature of the alliance started to change. I already gave you the example of how Turkey viewed PYD-YPG in Syria and how Turkey viewed US support to that organization. I mean, basically, at that point, the two sides started to see each other as a mutual threat, because of US's support to the YPG. So, I mean, this has been the trend. First of all, let's, understand that. With Biden administration, it became even worse because the Biden administration basically tried to avoid Turkey, didn't want to engage Turkey. So AKP actually wanted Trump to win in a way, because they thought that with Trump they could, manage the relationship. They are right in the sense that both AKP has become very transactional and Trump himself is very transactional. That's what the AKP wants, I think. They want a transactional relationship, give and take, work on some areas, then compete in other areas. This is very different from an alliance that is norm-based, that is basically based on mutual understanding of global politics and even mutual understanding of common threats, etc. So from that, we move to more transactional relationship. And with Trump now, I think, AKP is aware of that. You are right. I mean, there are areas of divergences. But then Trump says, Turkey did a very good job in Syria and, he praises Erdogan. So I think on transactional basis, they can work on certain things and not agree on other things. And that's okay for AKP government. They don't really expect something more. But an interesting thing is happening right now, and that is the wedge between US and Europe. And this quest in Europe to develop its own defense and security capabilities. And that, of course, will have some implications for Turkey's position as well. So in a way, Turkey's Western allies, Turkey's NATO allies, are not a unified group anymore, right? So what will this mean in terms of how Turkey will engage with this developing story? I mean, of course, there are limitations in both. I mean, Trump is transactional, so you can do business with him, but Trump is also unpredictable, and and there are several policies that Turkey is not very about, especially the Middle East. So this is a difficult relationship despite everything. And when it comes to EU, of course, I'm hearing many discussions in EU countries and also in Britain that they are interested in, including Turkey in some form in their, groupings based on defense and security, etc., because, they know that building a capacity in this area will take some time. Turkey is an important actor in terms of its defense and security capabilities and also geopolitical position, etc. So there is that road as well. But the problem there is that, after all, still EU is concerned about democratic credentials, rule of law, etc. And there are so many problems in Turkey as regards to that, especially now with the recent jailing of, mayor of Istanbul. So, I mean, it is really an interesting position now. It is, there are possibilities, but also limitations with Trump. And now with EU as well, there are possibilities and limitations. I mean, this is a difficult situation to be. And just let me end with, linking this with strategic autonomy argument that Mithat Hoca also referred to. Of course, yes, I mean, part of it is, structural, and there are other countries, middle powers, who are talking about that. But then there are also challenges of strategic autonomy. I mean, one of them is this, right? I mean, what does strategic autonomy mean for Turkey? To engage with its Western allies, but at the same time develop relations, good relations with Russia and with China. With Russia, there are limitations. Mithat Hoca talked about it. It's not easy. There are opportunities, limitations. With China, it's the same thing. I mean, there are tensions in Turkey-China relations. And when it comes to your Western allies, once you have these problems, I mean, this is not strategic autonomy anymore. This is, being isolated and, not being able to implement your policy. So there are those pitfalls and dangers, I would say. And Trump adds to all of this with his uncertainty, unpredictability, and this, willingness to use crude, power politics, great power politics, and undermining institutions like NATO, which is not a good thing for Turkey, and norms. So, I mean, it is a difficult situation in that regard, I would say.
Thank you so much. And when you say great power politics, we are talking about the first half of the 20th century great power politics.
But we are back to, I mean, that's, the way he approaches Russia, for instance, right? I mean, he's saying Russia is the great power and I will deal with that, right? That's what he's saying. Unfortunately, this is very dangerous, but this seems to be the mindset. And, if I bring Russia to my side and isolate China, etc., I mean, thinking in those terms, it's very dangerous, but it seems to be the approach, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Çelikpala, please.
Dear Ambassador, the point is that I'm traveling a lot those days. I was in Bosnia, Mostar and Sarajevo, and then before, and I was in Baku, and I had a chance to talk to many friends in Armenia as well. For many, when they consider Turkey as an actor, they say that comparing a decade or 2 decades, Turkey is a real regional power. And they believe that Turkey proved itself in the Caucasus, especially Azerbaijani case, that it's a kind of a trustful and how can I say, an able actor to change the regional developments. This is a new perspective. But from Ankara's perspective, how to work with? As a regional power, you have a limited capacity to offer to your regional partner countries to change the environment, strategy, or transactionalism serves for at a level to resolve and to create some different regions that Turkey can play a leading role there. But still Turkey is a kind of a regional actor with a limited capacity, then needs some partners. We see in the Middle East, we see it in the Caucasus or the Black Sea areas. Of course, Ankara is trying to be an active, player in all those regions to show that can play a role of facilitator or kind of different negotiator and trustful actor, but how to relate its activities and objectives. We are just discussing with many friends. Ankara is very successful to follow all those procedures and all those developments, but what is the aim? What is the end result of all those policies? And this is a big question mark most of the time because of Turkey's transactional character. And maybe I agree with Melia Hocam, and she said Western partners are not unified for the moment. And this is the case from Ankara's perspective. How to work with, for example, is it possible to work together with European partners, not the EU, but the Europeans? And this necessitates to answer the question whether for the European partner countries, Turkey is a European actor or not, because it affects everything and Turkish perspective. Or security-wise, is it possible to work together with the US again as a security provider, as a partner for Ankara in terms of resolving all those security-related issues from the Middle East to the Caucasus, from the Black Sea and the other areas? And for example, we see very active American involvement in Ukrainian-Russian case. And they declared a kind of an agreement in Saudi Arabia regarding the Black Sea security. And no one involved in Ankara, whether the Montreux Convention, for example, one of those main pillars of Ankara's Black Sea policy, protected or not? What will happen, for example, if the parties are not comply with all those, I don't know, expectations of the peace deal? And what will happen, for example, Romania, Bulgaria, and the others? Therefore, those are the issues that Ankara necessitates to or must understand from the Western partners' perspective. If the Western partners are not ready to work with Turkey in terms of some regional issues, then what about Russia and the others? And it's very clear cut for Russian perspective and as well as Turkey. This is very transactional. And I believe as a person working on Russia-Turkey relations for a long while, I say that we are at the limits of Turkish-Russian relations. Because both actors do not share any common interest or future perspective for those near abroad. Let me say Russia's near abroad in all those regions are Turkey's near abroad as well. And Turkey's Caucasus or Turkey's Black Sea is much more different than Russia's Caucasus or Russia's Black Sea area, or even the Middle East and the Mediterranean. And both actors are competing with each other. And then is it Turkey's capacity and capability to limit Russia? And it seems that, for example, in the Caucasus, for the first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ankara sees a chance for Ankara to change the Caucasus in general, including Armenia, because of Armenia's domestic policies. And therefore, what will the Russian reaction if they manage to resolve the Ukrainian issue somehow? In all those regions, we don't know. And now still, despite the fact that we have some criticisms and analysis of Turkey's NATO membership or the role in NATO, Turkey is still a NATO member country. And this is one of the main pillars of Turkey's all regional policies. Without taking this a kind of a factor, it's impossible to understand and analyze Turkey's activeness on all those regions. And I'm sure that our Western partners somehow understands this position, how to use Turkey as a Western actor in all those regions to balance Russian, I don't know, presence, let me say. But the environment is much more different than 1990s. Now, Turkey is not a role model because, we have different developments, but Turkey is now a kind of an actor. Whether the Western partners would like to see Turkey as an actor, it's a big question mark as well. One of those in Turkey, Greek Cypriot government as the sole government, and despite the fact that many actors were questioning the new Turkic Union, whether it is a possibility or not, now many people in Turkey feel that they betrayed from their Central Asian partners or kins. The political environment, as you mentioned in your starting point, there are many new challenges in front of not only Turkey, but in all those regional actors as well. Whether you are ready to respond those new developments or not, this is the question mark for Turkey. And this is the reason why I was saying Turkey concentrated on its own domestic issues and tackling with all those Western partners for a long while has no chance to offer something positive to all those regions and regional actors. We have to resolve those issues first. Then afterwards, we may propose something positive or constructive to change the political, security, or economic environment in all those regions. If not, you are not a trustful actor. This is the dilemma of Turkish foreign policy making in those days. And this is the main limitation for resolving all those issues in different regions.
Thank you very much. We haven't touched upon the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace deal. Please, yeah.
Yeah, if you would like to, and this is an issue, and it's an important issue. In this case, Turkey is, as I said during my presentation, is not a neutral actor. Azerbaijan is Turkey's ally. We have an agreement with the Azerbaijanis, and now all the Caucasian countries, including Georgia, our closest partner, because most of the time, Georgia is much more important for Ankara than Azerbaijan. This is, I believe, what I believe, because without having Georgia as a partner, a very close friend of Turkey, it's impossible for Ankara to reach out Azerbaijan to support Azerbaijan's transformation or cooperation whatsoever, or you create a new Caucasus. And within this equation, Turkey is a party in this Azerbaijani-Armenian negotiations, and there was a chance altogether to work and to resolve two issues. One is Türkiye-Armenia rapprochement or opening, and the second one is to resolve Azerbaijani-Armenian peace deal. Now, both parties intentionally separated. And Ankara is so silent despite the fact that envoys did many big job and the border is ready to be opened. And I see last couple of weeks, Turkish public opinion and Armenian public opinion are very active for the engagement. And the presidents are talking to each other, but they do not take any step because most probably Turkey doesn't want to leave Azerbaijan aside, and Azerbaijani partners believe that without Turkish Armenian I don't know processes, it's impossible to resolve Azerbaijan and Armenia peace deal or resolve it to sign an agreement. And I was in Baku and I listened top level people there, and I'm aware you are also following very closely. And they said that the peace deals are ready, but they're expecting such a kind of a constitutional change in Armenian side. I don't know whether Pashinyan and his entourage are strong enough to change the flow of events within Yerevan and to manage to change the constitution. And then afterwards, of course, comes Armenians' declaration of independence, because it is a kind of a declaration that they are, I don't know, expecting some territorial exchanges from the beginning. Now it's over. And most probably, Armenian side is the leading side to move forward. At least the Azerbaijani expectations are based on it. And from this perspective, I don't expect any kind of a move from Ankara to take any step to move forward. Of course, they are encouraging Armenia and even Azerbaijan from behind the curtains, let me say, behind the doors, closed doors. But I do not expect such a kind of a move to change the flow of events. Of course, it may help to change the geography and environment. All those connectivity projects are on the table, and all of them serves Turkey's interest as well, all together with the regional actors. There is no need to exclude any of them. But I am not expecting such a kind of a quick move. But I see a kind of an encouragement from the other actors. But Ankara's perspective is to leave it to both parties, both Azerbaijan and Armenia, to negotiate between themselves and to resolve this issue. Therefore, I am not expecting a quick resolution of those issues and normalization between between Armenia and Turkey.
Thank you very much. Actually, my concern, which I have shared with my Azerbaijani colleagues, is that I understand why they expect the constitutional changes, which state basically claims of Azerbaijani sovereign territory in an Armenian constitution. I understand why Azerbaijan is not keen on having this Minsk group, which has been, and it's quite a fair attitude because it's been there for 30 years and it did nothing for Azerbaijan and for resolution. That is understandable, but I also have a concern whether too much pushing may result in the downfall of the Pashinyan government and the return of Moscow-controlled Armenian nationalists, and whether this is in Azerbaijan's interest. And number two, the deal, however imperfect deal, would open new opportunities. Azerbaijan always claimed, and rightfully so, that any mediation would have been basically distorting the peace process, and only direct talks with Armenia have resulted in progress. And this peace deal would open much greater opportunities for direct talks, for instance, in Tbilisi, tête-à-tête between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which could contribute to the resolution of the remaining outstanding issues. All right, now we have final round of questions, and as I can see, all of them come from my students. One is from Pakistan, actually. Okay, one actually concerns international economic situation, the risks of the trade war, how Turkey is dealing with those. And also I would add from my own side whether Turkey's own economic situation could affect its ability to project its regional influence and conduct the foreign policy. This is question one. Let me read all the questions and you pick whichever you like. The other question actually is concerning NATO. Well, Georgia in NATO is now under big question, not because of NATO, but because of Georgia's own de facto government. But in theory, would Turkey be interested in continuing to work on behalf of Georgia and maybe all three Caucasus states? Just imagine a situation where Armenia also considers Turkey as a partner and not as a threat, not as an adversary. In this ideal world where Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia could be actually partners and could cooperate in the security area, whether Turkey would be interested in basically promoting this idea, whether it is NATO or whether it is some other security structure. And the third question is about the Syria-Turkey relations. What approaches can be taken to improve relations between Turkey and Syria and enhance regional security in that direction? And then we have a question from Pakistan. Can Zangezur corridor be successful in Azerbaijani and Turkish-Iranian interference? Not quite sure. Well, I guess it means whether the Zangezur corridor is still on cards, whether it is, if implemented, and that would be actually my question too. Suppose Armenia is pressed and basically has no other choice but to agree with the Zangezur corridor. Would it be a reliable transportation route, strategically reliable, as it goes under the nose of Iran, literally? So, if Professor Altanashik would like to take some of those questions.
Okay, there was one question on Syria and the challenges there. I mean, there are so many challenges out of Syria. The issue of economics is a big issue, and the country has been devastated after years and years of war. The economic situation is dire, and of course Turkey cannot just by itself deal with this because Turkey, to make matters worse, Turkey is also going through intense economic crisis. So one of the issues there is lifting of sanctions by the US and the EU, and that is not progressing, fast enough. There are still some sanctions have been left, some still remain. There are some preconditions. There are also some, domestic limitations in the US and also in the EU, some discussions among the member states. So this is number one challenge, and this is, Turkey is promoting lifting of sanctions in international fora, but this has not happened yet. And this, this promise by the new government that it's going to be an inclusive process and they will be transiting into a new system of governance. Of course, we still have time for that, but there are tensions with that as well. I mean, after all, this is a group that split from Al-Qaeda, and despite their assurances, many people are concerned. The minorities are concerned, and there were, instances with Alevi community. So, I mean, this is, and, there are some problems with the Druzes. So there are those kinds of issues as well. How this transition will take place. Will it going to be inclusive enough? So, I mean, these are all issues that go beyond Turkey's capacity. This is really, as the person who asked the question said, this is, a very complex question. That's a question that Turkey cannot deal with by itself. So there has to be international cooperation, especially US and the EU countries are important. Regional countries are important. At least Saudi Arabia is forthcoming in that. But there is so much to do in Syria still, and as I said, Turkey by itself has limitations. Turkey cannot spearhead the transition in that country. And as far as I can follow, I mean, compared to the earlier periods, especially when Davutoğlu was the prime minister. I mean, when this uprising started, there was a lot of euphoria and, things that expectation that everything will change and Turkey will be playing all these roles. I mean, with the current, people in the foreign ministry, at least it's my observation that they've been more cautious and they've been more aware of the limitations, I would say. I hope that's the case, because I think, this is not an issue to hyped up about. There are serious problems in this realm. So we'll see. I mean, it's not up to Turkey, but as I said, as a general rule, Turkey wants a stable Syria territorially, with its territorial integrity. I mean, Turkey wants this for its own interests, but I believe that as someone who works on the Middle East, that's not a bad idea. I believe that this is also good for the Syrian people if that's really an inclusive government, and that's also good for the stability in the region. So we are going to see whether this will happen or not. In terms of trade war, of course, I mean, Turkey is not one of those countries that were affected directly by this, because Turkey does not have surplus in its trade with the United States. Turkey just got this 10% flat tax, not additional one. But of course, I mean, all this trade war, instability in the international markets and world economy is negatively affecting Turkey as well, because especially in a time when Turkey is very vulnerable, its economy is very weak, and it tries to attract foreign direct investment, etc. So overall, this is not something Turkey can benefit. It may open some opportunities as to trade with China and others, maybe investments, but in a context of zero-sum global economy, trade war, things like that, it would be difficult for Turkey as a country that has been highly integrated with the global economy, that has been promoting, economic integration since the 1980s. This is not necessarily, I would say, good news for Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Çalıkbağlar, please. Your microphone is muted.
I'm very sorry. Let me start with this NATO membership question. Of course, Turkey follows a kind of an open door policy from the beginning, not only for the Georgian membership, but all the Caucasian countries' NATO membership, and of course, Ukraine's NATO membership is the case for Turkey, and Turkey openly supports this move, and one of those staunch allies of all those regional actors to become not only NATO, but the EU member as well. This is the perspective. And this is the way how to change all those regions and make Turkey an actor in all those regions, despite the fact that we have some issues with the US and EU. But, it's possible because we have a background and to resolve those issues. Therefore, my Georgian friends may, of course, trust Turkey on this issue. But of course, what about the Western hypocrisy, the Western attitude, and different narratives regarding the security of Europe or Europe's borders? And Georgians are much more experienced than many actors in the region. Therefore, the details. But I can easily say that Turkey supports this move. As for the connectivity projects and economy, Melia Hoca covered the general perspective. We have issues in terms of finance and FDIs and other economic dire straits. But the regions are very important for Turkey, and Turkey tries to be a kind of a hub, not only for energy, but for all those connectivities from west to east, from south to north. And this is a case. And currently, especially the Caucasus, features extensive connectivity options, including land routes such as railways and highways and maritime routes across the Caspian Sea, Black Sea, and even Aegean Mediterranean regions. They are all interconnected to each other just because of Turkey's geographic location and Turkey's trade and economic relations with all those neighboring regions. It's a giant. As I mentioned, it is one of those G20 countries. Therefore, it creates a kind of a scale of economy and how to complement Turkish economic and trade environment with the regions. This is the question mark, and how to establish a vital and sustainable infrastructure. This is the case. And in addition to this air travel, digital networks, energy supply chains must be all integrated into this framework, and which necessitates the Armenian inclusion as well. And these connectivity initiatives alongside we already have between Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, we need to expand all those connectivity projects. And this is very important. And taking decisive steps, let me say, to enhance cooperation in this area, whether through the development of initiatives like Zangezur Corridor, or the Arash project, or the Yerevan proposed crossroad for peace. They are all welcome. And all of them will significantly contribute to fostering regional cooperation, mutual understanding, and stability. I believe in it. Therefore, all the actors, including Turkey and Georgia, most probably, support such a kind of an idea. Of course, we have regional competition, rivalries, many limitations, and of course, a kind of different projects that different actors ready to invest, or the others are against those projects, but they are going to work on it. And most probably this middle corridor, a strategic route linking the South Caucasus to European markets through Turkey, or other projects. Georgia has a special agreement with the EU. Armenia has some special agreements with the US. And those are the positive signs. And Azerbaijan has just signed many agreements with the European countries in terms of energy cooperation and the others. Therefore, I see a kind of a potential. And if we utilize such a kind of a potential with the support of our partners, including the EU, most probably they serve the connectivity of all those regions to the outer world, and it helps the development of all those regional projects. We know EU has more than 33 infrastructure projects, for example. They sign many agreements there. And how to normalize relations with the initiating such a kind of a projects. Therefore, I see potential, but whether, I don't know, they are going to realize in a short period or not. But I see kind of a positive prospect for the Caucasus in general, comparing the Middle East and other regions. Therefore, we can play a role, but how? I don't know. The last point, I may say that I agree how to support Pashinyan administration and try to keep Armenia away from the Russian orbit and to keep it as the Western partners is a great challenge. But we have an experience of Turkish-Armenian rapprochement and Armenian Constitutional Court decisions, and Azerbaijanis are very careful from this perspective. And I see they are talking to each other, and this is very important. For example, it's impossible to bring Ukrainians and Russians on the same table, but Azerbaijanis and Armenians sitting on the same table and discuss those issues without having any other facilitation. And this is the thing that I am very optimistic for the future of both Turkish-Armenian and Azerbaijani-Armenian relations.
Super, and bang on time. I mean, we haven't had any webinar that was so punctual. Can I thank you both for being such wonderful participants? Thank you for your analysis, and thank you for your cooperation. It's always a great pleasure to see you, to work with you, and I hope that our path will cross in the future as well.
Thank you.
Very much,
Yes,
and
thank you so
thank you
much.
to all of our viewers. Thank you, Melih Hanım.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Görüşmek üzere hocam.
Görüşürüz. Hoşça kalın.
Okay, madloba.